Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your buddy Chewie. This is the 411 from 406, and I am joined once again by my brother from another mother, Mr. Pip. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Good evening to you and yours and everyone who's listening tonight. All three of you, as we like to joke.
So it has been, let's see, the last time we got together and recorded, let's see here, I'll have to pull it up. It was what? It was episode
37 or 8.
37 or 38. That sounds about right. 38. It was the favorite movies without sequels. I got a real kick out of that one. We got a ton of really good feedback from that one as well. I think we've got another good show for you this evening. It was one that that for me was not easy, which candidly are the ones that I kind of enjoy doing. Right? It's like these are those lists that I just can't kind of rattle off the top of my head, which I'm a big fan of. So tonight we're doing our favorite action movies.
Yep.
But let's see. Before we get into that, first of all, how are you? Are things good?
Things are good. Things are really good. It's it's a crazy month around work and around the house, but I mean, we're getting by. Everyone's good here. How about you?
Good. We are we are kind of back into the, I won't say pre-COVID, but in terms of being busy, we're almost back, right? I mean, my boys play basketball and baseball, and so we've got one travel basketball and 2 travel baseballs going on right now, and so it seems like I'm always running to and from a practice or this, that, and the other thing. So,
but I think the big news that we need to announce, the earth-shattering news that we need to announce, is that we are finally going to get a chance to actually see each other face to face in the upcoming month. It sounds like it's
Yes.
allegedly being planned right now, where you and I will actually be able to spend some long overdue FaceTime with each other and get together for our traditional WrestleMania weekend. And who knows what's going to happen? Maybe a few beers are imbibed, maybe a few wings that will make my stomach regret life, and maybe even do a one-on-one live version of our 411 on 406 podcast. I mean, who knows what happens?
You never can tell. One thing that we have never done very good at is planning. so you never can tell, but it would not shock me if we are able to record a podcast or two while you're here. I'm very much looking forward to that.
Cool. Be great.
We got 2 nights again of WrestleMania, April 10th and 11th, Saturday and Sunday, which last year was a really just a bizarre experience. That was kind of right at the beginning of COVID. We were just about a month into COVID at that point. WrestleMania, if you recall, if you're a wrestling fan, the WWE really tried to hold off to the last minute of having that event live. It was going to be at Raymond James Stadium, and eventually the virus got to the point where they just couldn't do it, right? And so they had it inside. Where was it? Was that the Performance Center or the WWE headquarters? Or
I think it was at the Performance Center.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be at Raymond James Stadium. Yeah. And I think they ended up moving it to Orlando, right? Isn't that where their Performance Center is?
Yeah, I think that's right. But this year they're planning. They're going back to Raymond James. They are going to have fans, I believe. So we'll see. Virus news nationwide, I think, is trending in the right direction. I know Ohio, at least, we are lower in new cases than we've been, I think, since September of last year. Ironically enough, as we sit here and record this tonight on the 11th of March, tomorrow is my 1-year anniversary of sitting at home. March the 12th, 2020 was my last day in the office. So
happy birthday.
Right, exactly. So, but all right.
Well, hey, before we get into this, I'd like to actually kind of do maybe sort of a what's the right word? Like a callback. I'd like to talk maybe since we've had a chance to digest the previous podcast, I'd like to see if there's sort of any lingering thoughts or, I myself, I'm a big fan of downloading our podcast and listening to it because I just love all the content that we cover. So, I did that, and I listened to it on my walks when I go out for lunch. And I had a few thoughts, like a few sort of afterthoughts as I was listening through it. And one of them, and I'm curious to know if you have any, but one of the ones that came across my mind is I was kind of surprised that on your last list. So our last list was the movies that our favorite movies that never got sequels. Because I listed a lot of sort of obscure 80s sci-fi movies, that were near and dear to my heart. And the one movie that you have not mentioned yet on this podcast that I thought would come up, and I don't think will come up tonight, is that Megaforce movie that I still know absolutely nothing about, other than I watched you meet, oh God, what's his name? I forget already.
Barry Bostwick.
Barry Bostwick from oh Jesus, I'm forgetting everything. The Michael J. Fox news radio, is that what it was called? Or
he was on news radio. He's probably best known for his role in is it, no, not Little Shop of Horrors. What's the one where everybody gets together in the movie theater and like sings the songs, and maybe it is Little Shop.
No, it's Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Rocky Horror, yeah, he was in Rocky. I've never even seen it, so that's why I'm ignorant to it. But that's probably where he's most well known. But yeah, he was also on. Was he on Spin City?
Yeah, there you go. Okay, that was it. I think that was the one I was trying to think of. That's the Michael J. Fox one. But I'm surprised that hasn't been uttered yet in this show, because maybe you're saving it for the best movies you've never heard of podcast, which is, one of the ones we should add to our list. But I thought for sure I would hear that one. Yeah,
you know what? Megaforce is one of those movies. I recognize that it's a terrible movie, right? It's just not a good movie. And that's probably why I don't add it to these lists. I could probably add it to just about every list that we cover. I could add it to the favorite movies without sequels list. I could probably add it to my favorite action movies. I could, there's a bunch of these lists that I could probably add it to. It is, if you've never seen it, and I'm sure most people have not, it is the budget version of Delta Force, which is a budget version of other things, right?
Of like Rambo or something, right?
Yeah, I mean it is the D, E, and F list celebrities. Barry Bostwick probably is the only one that anybody has ever really heard of in that movie. But it happened to be one of the first movies that I saw in the theater when I was probably, I don't know, I probably have to do the math, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that. And it was just a cool, there was flying motorcycles and motorcycles that had rockets on them, and they had camouflage and they changed colors. It was just this was real life G.I. Joe for a 10-year-old, right? And so it's I imagine, I imagine it's probably a little bit like you with Last Starfighter, right?
Exactly.
It's got it, you really love it, and it's a nostalgia piece, but you kind of recognize it's maybe not the best, doesn't hold up all that well, and right. Is, maybe not the best film. So
it's more because of the ties to my childhood versus like the fact that it's actual like riveting cinema or anything like that.
Yes. It's funny. I belong to I will tell you though, I'm not the only person that has this affinity for this movie. There actually are more than one Facebook groups, Megaforce like lovers. In fact, there's actually a guy who is older than us, who his like life's hobby is building actual like life-size Megaforce. Like he's rebuilt the movie props, so he's got the motorcycles, the Jeeps, it's actually pretty cool. I can't imagine actually doing it, but it's kind of cool. So
that is cool.
Yeah.
All right, well let's get started on this thing, man.
Absolutely. So again, tonight is favorite action movies, and we recognize that that's a very kind of broad swath of movies, right? So really the only restrictions we put on it is we're no Star Wars movies. I think it's fair to say that we are both Star Wars nerds, but we don't necessarily consider those action movies. I think you'll probably get a much better understanding of what we consider action as we go through this. And we're not going to have any Marvel movies, so nothing from the MCU. I guess in my opinion, there's really only a couple of those movies from either of those franchises that I would consider action, I would probably put Rogue One as an action movie. As you know, that in my opinion is really the only war movie in the Star Wars universe. And I would probably put, Infinity War and Endgame as action movies. The problem with those is those are incredible movies, and we can have an entire podcast about the MCU. But those movies aren't great unless you've put in the effort to watch 23 movies. You would really be lost, especially if you went into Endgame. You'd have no fucking idea. You could probably watch Infinity War and kind of make your way through it, but you would not appreciate that movie at all. I don't think. So that's why I would kind of disqualify those.
Yeah, the thing that makes you're right, we should do a whole nother podcast, but the things that make those movies great are the fact that they are the culmination of a 21 or 22 more movie arc that finishes with, in a way that's incredibly appropriate and honorable to the entire series. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That's and I this was a really, I'll just go ahead and say this was a hard list for me to make because I was maybe unfairly exclusive of certain types of movies. Like I tried to take all the fantasy type movies like Star Wars, the Marvel movies, the Lord of the Rings kind of stuff. I tried to take those aside because I don't really, and this is just the way my own brain works, I don't lump fantasy into action as we talked about. But I've got a couple themes that go along with my list. The first one is sci-fi. I feel like you can do sci-fi and action at the same time, even though sci-fi is sort of, it's fantasy, basically. It's just a specific type. And the interesting thing that I thought when I looked at this list, because there's always a theme and always an unintentional theme, but my theme this time is all my movies have sequels, which is funny because all the movies from last week don't have sequels.
Okay. All right.
And again, completely unintentional, but that's just kind of how it worked out. So I'll be interested to see how if your brain sort of worked the same way as mine.
So it's funny. So I actually have 6 films on my list, and you'll understand why I have 6 when we get there. I'm not cheating, I promise. Basically one of them I think I'm going to disqualify. So, but of those 6, there's only one that is a standalone film. So all the other ones do have sequels. So
okay, yeah, I think that's pretty common, especially with action movies.
Yes.
That's kind of successful action movies typically spawned, additional stories and more money and all that good stuff.
And then the little different thing that we're going to do tonight is typically we'll do honorable mentions. We're not really going to do that. We're going to do what's called rapid fire at the end. And those are just what they say, just kind of rapid fire, quick questions. We can certainly go into them and talk about them. But the intent is, hey, I'm going to say something and boom, you just got to answer it quickly. So let's see. I chose the topic this evening. So I'm going to let you go first with your first favorite action movie of all time.
All right, there's a lot of pressure, but I don't know why this feels different. Like I feel like I have to do it right. My first one is from 1988, and this one actually, when I started this list, this one started at the top. It started as my number 1, and I'm like, oh, I forgot about this one. Oh, I forgot about that one, and then it worked its way down to number 5. But it is still a phenomenal movie, directed by John McTiernan. This is Die Hard. Bruce Willis, Bonavidelia, Alan, the Metatron himself, Alan Rickman, Reginald VelJohnson, and William Atherton, better known as the man with no dick from Ghostbusters. I'm going to try to limit going into plot summaries for any of these because everybody's going to know every movie that I have, but everyone knows that this is about Lieutenant John McClane. Actually, I don't remember if he was a lieutenant in this movie, but I think it was John McClane going back to attempt to reconcile a failed marriage only to stumble upon an international hostage situation. Happens to the best of us. But this took place in California at the Nakatomi building, which is actually Fox Plaza in Century City in LA, which is, the area where I think all the lawyers are known to have congregated. But to me, the interesting thing about this movie is that it really ushered in sort of a new genre of action movies. It didn't really require the protagonist to be a bodybuilder, right? Like up until this point, so this was 1988. Up until this point, it was all Schwarzenegger and Stallone, and even to some degree a lot of martial arts actors or actors that were trained specifically in martial arts. But Bruce Willis was none of these things. In fact, he was still filming the television show Moonlighting with Sybil Shepherd at the time. So he was known more as a comedian than anything else. And the idea that there was a point in time where Bruce Willis was not known as somebody who could be in an action movie is just borderline insane today in 2021, because he could still pull off an action role. And he has, because they've made 4 sequels to this movie, all of which are probably marginally less better than the previous, although I think Die Hard 2 is very underrated and a really, really good movie. And one of the things that I think really helps this movie stand out a lot is that Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber is probably, arguably, the most interesting action star, the most interesting villain in an action movie in the 80s, in my opinion. He was fantastic. He went on to do a lot of things, most notably Harry Potter. I mentioned him as the Metatron. He was in the movie Dogma, which I really loved. That one's near and dear to my heart, but he's been in a ton of stuff. He was a fantastic actor. Rest in peace, Alan Rickman. But yeah, Die Hard, 1988. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I absolutely love Die Hard. And you're right. I mean, you're spot on. I think, you know, he's really this film, and maybe like Lethal Weapon, right? Are movies where we really started going from the big bodybuilder, you know, the Schwarzenegger and Stallone, to the everyman, right? It's, you know, he's a normal guy. He can get hurt. He bleeds when he gets cut, you know, those kind of things. And yeah, I mean, yeah, no doubt, Die Hard is an amazing, amazing choice. Well done.
Yeah, Lethal Weapon's a good call, and it did come out a year before this, so maybe this isn't the trendsetter necessarily.
Right.
Although Lethal Weapon is a little different because it's considered kind of a buddy comedy between Danny Glover and Mel Gibson. But yeah, this was unique in that sense. But
okay, all right. So my number 5, let's see, is a 1996 film. Let's see, I'm looking at my dates here. 96. It is not the oldest and it is not the newest. How about that? It's right smack dab in the middle. So yeah, 1996 was directed by none other than, in my opinion, a very underrated action director, Mr. Michael Bay. I know he gets a lot of shit for being, you know, the explosion guy, but I actually like a lot of his films. This one stars Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage. It's called The Rock. I absolutely love this film. First of all, I'm a huge Sean Connery fan all the way back to James Bond. And I'm a big Nick Cage fan, right? I know Nick Cage at this time in 2021, his star has really fallen, right? Obviously, as being an overactor and this, that, and the other thing. But I think in this performance specifically, I think he's great. You know, this one was produced by Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson. You know, Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage, Ed Harris is in here, Michael Biehn, William Forsythe. It's got a great cast. We talked on our last cast about movie scores. This one is by Hans Zimmer, who did Inception and some other stuff.
Fantastic.
You know, had a budget of $75 million and a box office of $335 million, which by today's standards is not huge money, but back in 96, you know, this was a moneymaker, right? And I'm actually kind of shocked this is the one that doesn't have a sequel on my list. And it absolutely could, in my opinion. This, again, I won't go into plot summary, but again, The Rock is another name for Alcatraz, the prison in San Francisco. Sean Connery's character, it's kind of a play off his James Bond. He's a British Secret Service guy that was in jail on The Rock and actually managed to escape. And long story short, terrorists take over The Rock and shit goes sideways. And the Nicolas Cage's character, who I believe he's an FBI agent, but he's kind of a nerdy, he's like a scientist, for lack of a better term. He's called in to they enlist Sean Connery's character to basically break into the Rock as opposed to breaking out of it. So again, lots of explosions, lots of guns. Just it's a great film. It's a great film.
It's a really, really great film. In fact, I'm a little bummed you mentioned this because one of my rapid fire questions was going to be, which one is the better Bay film? Is it The Rock or Con Air? And yep. I'm going to assume Con Air isn't on your list. I could be very wrong about that, but Michael Bay, I'm not the biggest Michael Bay fan, but I will say that he was absolutely on fire in the mid to late 90s. And I loved The Rock. I loved Con Air. I thought both of those movies were good. But The Rock especially, I think if I had to pick a favorite Michael Bay movie, it would be that one, because that one just had because he did Bad Boys too, right?
He did the original
Bad Boys as well. I mean,
yes.
Yes. So I think he did the second one too, but I'm not sure. But he had such a unique style and a unique energy behind what he was doing. And at that time, he was infallible when it came to action movies. And they were so fun and they were so exciting. And The Rock is a perfect example of that. Nicolas Cage was great in that. Sean Connery was great in that. Ed Harris was fantastic in that. I would be mad at myself if I didn't bring up Vanessa Marcel, who is, we'll continue to make 90210 callbacks with every opportunity that we get through every podcast.
She's hot.
Holy crap. Is she just melting the screen every single time that she's on it? It's amazing. And she married Corey Feldman at one point. Can you believe that?
And then she married David Silver too.
That's right, she did.
Who then went on to marry
Megan Fox.
Megan Fox.
Yeah. So we need to maybe have a conversation about what is Brian Austin Green doing that we're not, because I did not think that. Well, anyways, let's not talk about David Silver. Let's talk about The Rock. That movie's great. It's a really good pick, and it's one that it's really fun to revisit because it almost just immediately throws you back into the mid 90s, and it's an exciting thrill ride, and Michael Bay at his best for sure.
Yeah, big fan. Yeah, one more thing on Bay. Again, I these days I know Michael Bay, again, his star has fallen a little bit, but I to me he makes kind of turn your brain off popcorn movies, right? I know I think I'm in the minority here, but I love all of his Transformer movies as well. I know like most guys my age don't, that are big G1 Transformer fans don't really like the Bayformers universe, but they've got their problems. But again, they're just kind of turn your brain off, watch a movie. It's big fucking robots transforming and talking and blowing stuff up, right? And that's what I'm looking for with a Michael Bay movie. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like most of the time, if you set your expectations right, that's what you're going to get. So, solid choice.
All right. What do you have for your number 4, sir?
All right. So number 4 is my newest movie on the list. It is from 2003. It is directed by Quentin Tarantino, and it is Kill Bill. This one is one that once I realized it was an action movie, once it sort of popped into my head, I'm like, oh, cool, I can put this on my list. I will sort of own up to the fact that when I saw Pulp Fiction, I thought it was okay, but it was really weird. When I saw Reservoir Dogs, obviously in different chronological order, I wasn't the biggest Quentin Tarantino fan. Like I thought it was different, and it was all of it was extremely violent, which is not anything I have a problem with, but I just didn't get it. Like it never resonated with me in a very particular way. And then I saw Kill Bill, and it totally blew my mind. It sort of dips its toe in the fantasy world, fantasy martial arts. Kill Bill has a lot in common in my mind, from an aesthetic perspective, to something like Big Trouble in Little China in a weird way. Certainly
very much.
Like they're not on the same level with violence. Like obviously Kill Bill is a very violent movie, but in terms of this is sort of a love letter that Tarantino wrote to the grindhouse genre of B-movie films in the 70s, which touched on things like martial arts and blaxploitation and spaghetti westerns and things like that. And spaghetti westerns was a big sort of theme of the Big Trouble in Little China. And it's really interesting because the movie starts and the hero, quote unquote, of the movie is getting shot in the head. Um, and then it follows the journey of her recovery as she sort of plows through all of her assailants one by one to get to the man they call Bill. Um, and I just thought, like, visually, there's something about the cinematography, the aesthetic, and the techniques that Tarantino uses to shoot this movie that makes it such a beautiful film. And it's just so good. And it's this one is you could almost lump the second one in with this one, although the second movie it's not really as much of an action movie as this one. I think the first one is way more action heavy.
For your pick here, you're choosing Volume 1 as
Volume 1. Yeah, thank you. That's a important distinction. This is Kill Bill Volume 1. That is very action heavy, and the movie starts with that, and then it continues through that into a really it crescendos into an insane fight scene towards the end with 88 different
Crazy 88,
the Crazy 88, the member the different gang members and such. But one thing I learned, which I thought was really interesting, is that the character of Bill was originally written for Warren Beatty, of all people, which to me
wow, really?
would not work at all.
No,
Like,
David
it does
Carradine
not work.
perfect in that movie.
David Carradine was amazing. I like, if anything, I would have guessed that Quentin Tarantino sat down and said, "I want to write a movie about David Carradine," and this is what came of it. And because he just seems to fit in it so well. But
did you ever watch when you were growing up? What was the David Carradine? Was it Kung Fu?
It was Kung Fu.
Did you ever watch that?
No, to be honest with you, until I saw this movie, I don't know that I've seen David Carradine in anything. But I knew his name because David Carradine, I think, very famously, replaced Bruce Lee in the that part in Kung Fu was meant for Bruce Lee, but Bruce Lee didn't get the part ultimately because the studios were afraid that being an Asian American or being an Asian, that he wouldn't resonate with the audiences as well. So they ended up casting David Carradine.
Yeah, so I remember very vividly watching Kung Fu pretty regularly when I was growing up, and my dad would watch it, and it always seemed to be on like when we were having dinner or just dinner was over, you know what I mean? And it was shot in a very spaghetti western kind of manner. And yeah, that blows me away that Warren Beatty, fucking Dick Tracy, that
movie would have been so different with him in it, because David Carradine he was brilliant. He has
he really wasn't even in it, especially the first one. He really wasn't even in it all that much. In fact, do you even see Bill in the first? Do you even know who Bill is in the first movie? I'd have to go back and watch
him,
it.
but you definitely do see him at some point. Okay. I know that you do see him, but he gets way more screen time in the second.
In the second,
for sure.
Tarantino is an interesting one. I would agree. A lot of people just love Tarantino and think he's just kind of this groundbreaking, amazing filmmaker. In general, I would say I'm not a Tarantino fan, or I take that back. I'm not a fan of a lot of his movies. I don't really care for Inglourious Bastards. I don't really care for Django. This one though, and Pulp Fiction are the two that I can rewatch over and over and over again. And in fact, it's funny. My buddy and I were just talking about Pulp Fiction the other night. Every time I watch that movie, I get something else out of it. And Kill Bill is actually like that too, right? It's whether it's a background thing or it's something small. Great pick. Well done.
All right, give us your number 4.
All right, my number 4 is, I believe, my oldest. It's my oldest movie on the list. It is from 1981.
Ooh.
It had a budget of $20 million, had a box office of $389.9 million. It is directed by Steven Spielberg. It stars Harrison Ford, and it is Raiders of the Lost Ark. This film, it's funny, the first film I thought of when I thought of action movie, it was this one. I'm actually kind of surprised that is number 4 on my list. Kind of like you, it started out at number 1 and kind of continued to move down. There was no chance that this was ever not going to be on my list. Again, we're not going to bother with plots, but this follows archaeologist Henry Jones, i.e. Indiana, and it's adventure from the word go, right? He's treasure hunting, he's getting the girl, he's stopping the Nazis, he's all of these kind of things. I mean, there are, I can think of at least 1, 2, 3, there's 4 or 5 what I would call action scenes in this movie that are, in my opinion, just iconic. And it's a great story. I think it's good enough that it could have been a standalone movie. It spawned 3 sequels. I think there's a 4th one that's coming. I'm not sure that I'm super thrilled about that, but but I'll certainly watch it. For a long time, this was like my all-time favorite movie. It's got an amazing score by the master John Williams. This one, I think, set in the 40s or maybe the late 30s. So it's got some Western to it. It's got some war to it. Absolutely love this one. I've probably seen this one probably more than any other on my list. One of my all-time favorite movies, not to mention the fact it's one of my all-time favorite actions.
Yeah, it's such a good movie. And I think Harrison Ford arguably is the biggest sort of, we'll say movie star, in quotes, not necessarily actor, but he may be the biggest movie star of our childhood, right? Because he occupied 2 of the most important roles, I think, for us as young boys growing up, as Han Solo and Henry Jones Jr.
Junior.
Exactly. This movie was so good. This one, I mean, it's interesting for me. Like, my history with Indiana Jones is funny because, like, the Temple of Doom was probably the first one I saw in the theaters, and then The Last Crusade was the first one that I just like. Oh my God, this movie is amazing! Like, The Last Crusade might be my favorite, just because of the brilliant casting of Sean Connery and all that goes with it. But Raiders of the Lost Ark sort of it set the template for everything that was to come. And there are so many brilliant things about what George Lucas and Steven Spielberg did with this movie, and Harrison Ford, obviously, and Karen Allen and everybody who's involved. It's just, I think that it's one of those movies that could be classified kind of as timeless, right? Because when it came out in the early 80s, but it was clearly about a storyline that took place many years before that. So I thought that it's the theme of religious artifacts and things like that. Like, I'd never heard of the Ark of the Covenant before, and it was a neat little introduction to that world for me. And I love the fact that if you freeze frame it at the right time when they're pulling the Ark out of its resting place, you can see hieroglyphics of C-3PO and R2-D2 on the wall. You can be sure that George Lucas had a big hand in that. But yeah, I mean, it's the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's the Indiana Jones. Well, I was almost going to call it the trilogy just out of habit, but it's fantastic. It's such a good movie. That's a great choice. That was one that I didn't think of, only because it fits more into adventure in my mind than it does action. Yeah. But I absolutely think it is definitely worthy of an action movie for sure. Yeah.
All right, sir. You're number 3.
Number 3. All right. So we're moving into the newest movie I'm sorry, it's not. Kill Bill was the newest movie. This one backtracks about 4 years into 1999, which in my opinion was a great year for movies in general. But this one in particular absolutely blew my mind and made me think of things in a whole different way. Directed by the Wachowskis, this is The Matrix, featuring Keanu Reeves, who has made his way on every list that I think that I've made so far. Carrie-Anne Moss, Lawrence Fishburne, Hugo Weaving, and Joey Pants, or Joey Pantoliano, who also ended up on the Goonies list from last week.
He did.
So this is such a good movie, so fun to revisit every single time I watch it. I remember seeing this for the first time at a place called Hollywood Bar and Film Works, downtown Indianapolis, which is one of the first places that I ever went to, one of the first movie theaters that I ever went to where they serve you food and drinks. It was one of those places, and it was really, really cool. Such a neat experience to be there for that. But more so because I just remember seeing that movie and it just totally blew me away. I had no idea what I was getting into. At that point, I'm trying to think back, and I should have done more research, but I don't really remember where Keanu Reeves was in his career in 1999. I don't think that it certainly wasn't in any sort of action genre. I think that he had probably done some other projects by that point. After like maybe Point Break, I think, things, there had been kind of a lull in terms of action as it relates to Keanu Reeves. I think, again, I should go back and do that research, but when The Matrix came out, it completely launched him back into the mainstream of everything. I read I was doing my research, and there's this really, I don't want to do a plot synopsis, but the quote from I'll quote Wikipedia, and I thought this was really good. It says, it depicts a dystopian future in which humanity is unknowingly trapped inside a simulated reality, which is called the Matrix, created by intelligent machines to distract humans while using their bodies as an energy source. And that in itself, like if I'm a studio executive and you pitch that to me as a movie, I'm like, what in the fuck are you talking about? Like, that makes zero sense. Which is funny because that leads into my next bit of trivia. This was originally pitched to Will Smith to be the part of Neo, and he essentially passed on it because he felt the same way. He didn't understand what was going on. But it was going to go to Will Smith and Val Kilmer, of all people, which in hindsight,
Wow.
I think would have been brilliant to see Val Kilmer in this movie because he's just quirky enough to pull off a Morpheus or the Oracle or some sort of really bizarre part for that. But Will Smith ended up turning this down for the studio epic that would be known as Wild Wild West, which I'm sure he's really bummed about. Now, he had done Men in Black 2 years before this, so perhaps he was trying to be conscious about entering too far into the sci-fi dimension. But I mean, this movie, I think it would be a huge oversight to not mention that this movie was massively praised for its incredibly innovative special effects.
Yes.
Specifically the bullet time effect, which is the scenes where it featured a series of cameras that were all sort of firing in rapid succession to create this massive sweeping effect. Like when he would bend backwards and then the cameras would all fire, and there would be a circle of cameras around him, lined up in a way that they wouldn't see each other, but they would all fire, and it would give this really, really cool effect. And it ended up winning like 4 Academy Awards for film editing, sound effects, and visual effects, deservedly so. But I can't say much for the sequels, unfortunately, and we are going to get yet another Matrix sequel scheduled to drop in December of this year by Warner Brothers, which means it will probably be on HBO Max. Matrix 4 will land. Matrix 2 was okay, but it sort of they decided to take a specific direction with it that I didn't really connect with. So if The Matrix itself was a standalone movie, it would be one of the greatest films of all time in my mind.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I remember walking out of the theater, and if you remember the last shot of The Matrix, it is Keanu Reeves or Neo. He is actually in the Matrix in the scene, and he hangs up the payphone, and he literally like flies up into the screen, right? And that is a quote power that he has not had up until that point. And you're just left with, you've seen this movie that kind of blows your mind. I would agree. I think I kind of wish they would have stopped at that first one. I think it was good enough to be a standalone movie. I have a feeling that the reason that they didn't was it had a $63 million budget and it made $463 million. So, anytime a movie makes $400 million, especially in 1999, that's nothing to scoff at. I would agree. The second one was okay. The third one just kind of turned into a there really wasn't much Matrix in it. It was more of just kind of a
Yeah.
dystopian war movie, which wasn't bad. But when you had the backdrop of quote the Matrix in it, it left a lot to be desired.
Yeah, the first movie was really standalone, or it could have been standalone. The second movie, when I watched it, I thought, okay, there were definitely parts of this I liked, but there were other parts that I wasn't sure about. The second movie, how I felt about the second movie completely hinged on
The
what
third movie.
happened in the third movie. And I hated the third movie. I had no interest in any of that. I don't even remember what happened in the third movie other than he went blind and there was a very big sort of Christ metaphor or something like that, which is fine. I don't mind those, but it didn't resonate with me at all. And it made me wish they would have stopped at one, which of course, if that were the case, it would have ended up as my number one slot on last week's or our last podcast for sure. But it's still a great movie in and of itself. And I can watch that first movie and be fine with it. Like I don't have to watch the sequels. I will certainly watch Matrix Part 4 when it comes out because I'm a consumer and I will consume, especially if it's Keanu Reeves. But for the most part, I'm not getting my hopes up.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so this might be a first on this podcast where not only we have the same movie on the list, but it's actually my number 3 as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Might be the first time. So yeah, again, I agree with everything you said. I don't know if we mentioned Hugo Weaving is the main bad guy in here, who is just absolutely amazing as Agent Smith. I mean, again, I'm not going to bother with a plot because A, I don't know that I could do it justice, and B, I'm sure everybody that's listening to this has already seen or seen the movie. It's funny, as I was going through this list, it's remarkable how many times, and I didn't necessarily put him on the list, but it's remarkable how many times Keanu Reeves came up as, kind of potential movies, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, Keanu Reeves is an action star, right? I mean, he
is.
He really is.
He's a great action star.
Yeah.
There were a couple my honorable mentions that I won't mention tonight because we're not doing that. There was one of his in there too. That So you had said kind of where he is in his career. So he had done Bill and Ted in '89. He had done Point Break in '91. He had done the second Bill and Ted. He did My Private Idaho, which obviously is not an action movie. And then he did Speed in '94. So he's coming off Speed. But I would agree that this is the one, Devil's Advocate in '97, which was the last kind of big movie before this for him. I thought that was a great movie, not an action movie at all. Yeah.
But I would agree. I mean, it was, in my mind, if you're thinking action movies, it was Speed and then this one, right? Then you go into, the John Wicks of the world and those kind of things.
That was my honorable mention.
God damn, those are great movies.
So good. I mean, the action in those movies are phenomenal. Like he sells it. Like I don't remember how old he is. He's got to be in his mid-50s at this point. But I mean, he sells everything that he's doing in that movie. And I believe the stunt coordinators are the guys that were working on the Matrix too. So
and it's funny. Like he does. Like he's gone and did all that tactical training, and like that's all him. That is not. For the most part, that's not a stunt double. Like that's actually Keanu Reeves. He's 56 right now. That's him doing that shit. And that's just really, really impressive.
And it's 100% believable. As much as an action movie with all that sort of fantastical gunfire and martial arts and all that stuff, like nobody believes you can get stabbed or shot that many times and still make it. But I mean, if anybody's going to pull it off, like he can do that.
It's Keanu. Yeah.
He does it great.
No,
I'm sorry I stole your pick.
No, not at all.
I ripped your thunder right out from under you, but
not at all.
But I'm glad we finally I think you're right. That's the first time we've ever had the same thing on the same point in the list. So that's really cool.
So, all right. So now your number 2.
My number 2. All right. So this one, this is one that I almost forgot about, but when I remembered it, I'm like, holy crap, I've got to put it really high on my list. 1987, directed by Paul Verhoeven. This is RoboCop.
Go Robo.
This movie is so good, and it's a lot deeper than just your sort of standard run-of-the-mill action movie, in my opinion. And I feel like if you watch it today, you may pick up on more of that than if you watched it back in the late 80s. But Peter Weller, Nancy Allen, Kurtwood, Dumbass Smith, as I like to call him, as we all know him from the 70s show, Dan O'Herlihy, which I'll make a quick callback. Dan O'Herlihy was in The Last Starfighter. He played the character named Grig, which was he was like an alien guy in The Last Starfighter. He was the main character's sort of co-pilot. Miguel Ferrer, who is a great actor, he's been in a ton of stuff, even some Marvel movies. And Ronnie Cox, who by name most people won't know, but Ronnie Cox was also in the Beverly Hills Cop movies as Lieutenant Bogomil.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so he was sort of an '80s police chief mainstay, right? Like he was the guy you got to play the high rep guy in the police movies. Everybody knows what RoboCop's about. It's a guy who was almost murdered by a bunch of bad guys and basically turns into a crime-fighting cyborg. But I think the thing that I love the most about this movie is that Paul Verhoeven directed it. And if you've seen a Paul Verhoeven movie before, you'll know that it's weird. Like on paper it sounds like one thing, but you watch it and it ends up being something else. Like he also did Total Recall, which is another movie very in the same vein.
Yep.
Starship Troopers, also very much like that. Very sci-fi. Yeah, it's a great movie. It's fantastic. He did Basic Instinct too, but I won't lump that in with this because that doesn't really fit the theme. But
did he do the first one or no?
Yeah,
he did the first.
He did the first.
You were saying Basic Instinct 2, not.
Oh, I'm sorry. Basic Instinct as well.
Okay.
Or also, as they say. But yes, he did the first Basic Instinct movie, which doesn't fit thematically with some of these other ones, but he's really fascinating to me, the way that he mixes this sci-fi violence with a weirdly complementary form of campy humor, right? And that's what RoboCop is. But on top of being an action movie, I mean, it really has a lot under the hood is in the way of social satire and it seemed to be really ahead of its time in that respect. It was an insanely violent movie, at least for 1987.
Yeah.
And my memories of it is it was the first movie that I knew of that wasn't, considered to be an adult movie, that was rated X when it or had an X rating at one point. The MPAA forced the studio to hack it apart and eventually got it to an R rating, but they've since released it on DVD and Blu-ray in a quote unquote uncut version. And it's really, really good. Peter Weller does so good in that movie, and I can't really identify how, but the movie has a lot of heart. It's not just about this robot cop that goes around shooting people. Like it really manages to, really kind of dig into a deeper story that I think is really solid. What's interesting to me, and this doesn't surprise me, but I thought it was interesting, some of the other casting considerations for RoboCop were Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Ironside, Rutger Hauer, Tom Berenger, Armand Assante, and Keith Carradine, and James Remar, which I think are all are all names that were more popular in the 80s, certainly.
Yeah.
But a lot of the reasons that they didn't end up going with Schwarzenegger is because they just thought he would look like the Michelin Man in the outfit, right? Like he was too big. Like Peter Weller was not a bodybuilder in any way, shape, or form. So he fit the character. He had I think Paul Verhoeven was quoted as saying, "I cast him because I really liked the way his jaw looked in the costume," which was basically all that you could see. But RoboCop's fantastic. It's such a good movie. It uses some really good special effects, a lot of good quotable lines, and it's fun, but it's a little deeper than you might think on the surface. So that's my number 2, RoboCop.
Yeah, it's a great film and a great choice. When I think of Verhoeven, I think of Total Recall, and I think Starship Troopers. And again, I'm thinking of those films from the social commentary, right? Because there's a lot, to your point, there's a lot going on, kind of beneath the surface there. The kind of visceral memory that I have of RoboCop is when Murphy gets shot all to hell.
Oh, that terrified me as a young kid.
That scene is brutal, and it's and you know what? It's a scene that you can. The movie is set in Detroit, and it's a dystopian version of Detroit.
Yep.
Which, candidly, is not too far from what Detroit kind of fell into. It has certainly made a huge rebound in recent years, but I mean, there was a time when Detroit was just really, really, really bad. And so I mean that movie, what came out in the 80s or whatever it was, you know, it wasn't too far from reality, right? And you could see that scene, and you know, there's drug dealers and they're killing cops and they're, you know, and you'd be like, oh yeah, that could totally happen, right? Loved this movie. A couple really awesome practical death scenes in it. There's a scene in it where a guy gets covered with nuclear ooze or nuclear waste or whatever, and literally is just kind of liquefied when a car runs over him, which is just, you know, when I put my horror hat on, it's just amazing, right? Agreed. Great choice. Well done.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the dystopian, you know, like futuristic dystopia thing has appeared on my list a couple times.
It has.
But yeah, it's really solid. I think my favorite scene from that, from an action perspective, is where there's a lady who's, you know, in the process of being sexually assaulted, and he shows up on site, and he points his gun, and the camera goes to the view of, you know, his viewfinder, and that he shoots it, and he shoots through her crotch into the guy's crotch. And it's just like it's just, you know, like, wow, who thinks of these things as far as action scenes go? And it's so interesting the way that they put some of that together.
Great, awesome choice.
All right, number two, give it to me.
So here's my number two, and here's where I have, this is my like fifth and sixth, right? Here's where I have two.
Okay.
Right? So
I've been trying to rack my brain figuring out what the hell you're talking about.
So my number two choice, and I think I'm going to disqualify it for the same reasons that we've disqualified some other films, the Marvel films and Star Wars films. But I feel I love this film so much that I wanted to talk about it. So I admit I'm cheating. I'm sorry. It's our podcast. You know.
Damn it, Greg.
It's the newest film on my list. It's 2008. It had a budget of 185 million, and it made over $1 billion. It is written and directed by Christopher Nolan. It is a Batman movie. It is The Dark Knight.
Oh, I almost put this on my list. I did. I almost broke my own rules to put this on my list. It's such a good choice, but please go ahead.
So again, I will remove it from my list, and I do, and this is where I have the other one. I have a backup for it, but so Batman is probably my all-time favorite superhero character. The Joker is my all-time favorite, you know, comic villain. And this film, I remember when you had seen this movie before I had, and it was probably 3 or 4 weeks before I had seen it, and your mind was blown. You were busting my balls that I hadn't seen it. You're like, you got to go see this movie. You got to go see this movie. And at the time I had not seen Batman Begins, and that was kind of what was holding me up to it. I was like, oh, I haven't seen the first one. I can't go watch the second one. You were like, no, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. And you were right. This is a movie that you do not have to see the first one. You do not have to see the third one. This is a standalone, badass action movie. And you know what? It's probably, if we ever do this list, it's probably in my top 5 films. Not comic films, not films. It is amazing. You know, it stars Christian Bale as Batman / Bruce Wayne, stars Michael Caine, stars Heath Ledger, in my opinion, the greatest performance as the Joker of all time. All due respect to Jack Nicholson, all due respect to Mark Hamill. This is the performance of the Joker. Gary Oldman, Aaron Eckhart, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Morgan Freeman. It's got an amazing cast. I talked a little bit on our last podcast about my love for Christopher Nolan. This is a dark, gritty, quote, real version of Batman, as real as the Batman character can be. Again, you know, music by Hans Zimmer. There's a reason it made $1 billion. It's an amazing movie. And I mean, from the opening credits till the end, it is balls to the wall action. Absolutely love it. That being said, I will remove it because for the same reason I removed Marvel and Star Wars. But I had to talk about it.
You're killing me.
I love this film.
I don't think you have to remove it. I think it's a perfectly suitable choice because, you can, I don't know how to say this. Like most comic book movies are very comic booky, right? Like they're very much of that ilk, but this movie is not like that, right? Like there's nothing about this movie, maybe the fact that a man dresses up like a bat. That's like the most sort of absurd part of this, but everything else that they do grounds this in such reality, and that's all to the credit of Christopher Nolan. This movie, I remember very specifically, like the teaser at the end of the Batman Begins is that the Joker's coming in the second movie.
Mm-hmm.
And, everybody gets really excited about that. But when I Am Legend came out, which we talked about, I think that was mentioned in our last podcast, I Am Legend came out in IMAX. And if you went to see it in the IMAX theater, there was a 6-minute trailer of The Dark Knight, which was essentially the first 6 minutes of the movie, the entire bank heist scene that featured basically faceless bad guys, all of which sort of looked like a version of the Joker. And it was phenomenal. And I watched that and I was shocked. I was floored. I'm like, I cannot be more excited to see a movie in my entire life than The Dark Knight. And it's one of the few times where I've been that excited, and it absolutely delivered on everything. I went to see this movie at midnight on a Thursday night when it came out, and it was amazing. There's nothing bad about this movie. It is a standalone movie. I agree with you. I think that's an excellent point, that it can be its own movie and you can leave it at that, and it's fine. There are no cliffhangers. There's no need to go back or go forward. It's its own great movie. The performances are fantastic. Everything about this movie is so beautiful. It might be in my top 5 of all time too, to be honest with you. It's just that good. And I was so thankful to have had the opportunity to be a fan of movies and see this when it first came out, right? Like, cause like our kids will see this and know that it's been around forever, but like we got to see this when it was huge. And it's arguably the best, I don't even know if it's arguable at this point. It's probably the best comic book movie that's ever been made.
Yeah. I mean, I guess again, that's a whole other podcast, right? I guess the only other one in my mind that I would put up against it as a single movie would be the original Iron Man. That's about the only other one. Again, with all Endgame and Infinity Wars, really you have to put in the effort to watch all those other movies.
Yeah.
This one you don't. You could sit down for 100 minutes and just be enthralled by this movie.
Yeah. So. For me, that list would include the original Superman, 1975, Richard Donner. That movie for me was the first superhero movie that I ever saw that I thought was really worth its weight. And to be fair, I think that was the first superhero movie that finally legitimized that genre on film.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Because before that, it was the 1960s Batman with Adam West that was super campy and intentionally so. But Donner we're getting way off track. But Donner Superman was the one that kind of legitimized making
genre,
the genre. So, but no, the Dark Knight's phenomenal. But I digress. Tell me your other one.
So my other one then is
two.
Yes, is a 1987 film. It was a $18 million budget, made $98 million. This is smack dab in the middle of that kind of sci-fi action, directed by John McTiernan, who also directed Die Hard. This is the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic, The Predator. This movie to me, again, you've got Schwarzenegger, you've got Carl Weathers, you've got the governor, Jesse Ventura. Again, a group of commandos, for lack of a better term, goes into the jungle, and they are hunting / being hunted by this alien beast known as just the Predator. This is this is an action movie, right? It's Music by Alan Silvestri. Lots of explosions, lots of blood, lots of blowing shit up. Not a whole lot more I can say about it. It's infinitely rewatchable. It holds up really, really well. You can watch that movie today, and it's really not dated, and it's almost 40 years old. I love this film.
Yeah, it is a really, really good movie, and it spawned one of the most bizarrely cast sequels of all time. Like they're like, hey,
Predator
how about
2?
instead of Schwarzenegger, we get Danny Glover to play Predator 2, or play the lead role in Predator 2, which I seem to have some weird recollection of liking that movie, but I can't remember. I maybe have seen it once, but I think that I liked it when I saw it. But of course, I was much younger at the time, so who knows? And it spawned other movies, other standalones, Aliens versus Predator, and things like that.
It's funny. I actually, I guess maybe we'll put in the same camp as the Transformer films. I actually really like most of the Predator movies. So it's Danny Glover, and Gary Busey is one of the main. Not a bad guy, but he's in that movie too. And then AVP, which is kind of universally panned as a terrible movie. I really enjoy that one as well. So I don't know if I like the Predator films. Actually, there was a relatively recent film called Predator or Predators.
Yeah, I think it's just Predator.
Which I thought was great. And then there was one 5 or 6 years ago called Predators, which again, I enjoy the entire Predator franchise, but
yeah,
the OG was the best. Yeah,
it's good stuff. I'm a little disappointed that they didn't follow that up with a proper sequel with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but at that point, I think he was, moving on to other things. Yeah. So, but that is a really good movie and sort of quintessential 80s action, right? Yeah. As it relates to, especially Arnold's, genre of movies. So that's good. All right. Well, I guess I'll go on to my number one. So I can't decide. I don't think this will be your number one, but it could be your number one. And it's something that we actually did mention, I think, on a recent podcast. This is 1991. It's James Cameron. It's Terminator 2. I could not go with this. I did mention it last week. I remember definitively because I called out it as being arguably the best sequel that has ever been made, which is a bold statement when you consider Empire Strikes Back, Godfather 2, whatever. But, for my money, I think they took a movie that was very good in the Terminator and they
made it better.
They improved on it 100x. I mean, it's amazing. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Eddie Furlong, and Robert Patrick made $500 million in the theater, which at the time ended up being the third highest grossing movie of all time. Can you guess which two movies were ahead of it?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
So this was the third, by the time it came out of the theaters, it was the third highest grossing globally movie of all time, behind two movies. Can you guess which two movies it had grossed more than that? And keep in mind, this was in 1991.
Star Wars was one of them.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
91. Jurassic Park wasn't out yet, was it?
No.
91. No, I don't. I can't think of the other one.
It was my number one pick from last week. It was E.T. actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that either because I don't ever think of that as being a big moneymaker specifically, but obviously it was. But at the time, it was the most expensive movie ever made. And one of the, as far as, the special effects were cutting edge. That was obviously the biggest part of the budget for the movie. And I lifted this quote directly from Wikipedia because and you'll know why by the time I finish it. It says the use of such technology was the most ambitious, and this is in reference to CGI specifically, was the most ambitious since the 1982 and 1984 science fiction films Tron and The Last Starfighter, respectively. So it lended itself very heavily to CGI-related special effects, which again had not become mainstream at that point. Like action movies, even Star Wars, which of course Return of the Jedi was 83 or whatever, 82, 83. Yep. that was all practical. Almost all of
Yeah.
that was very practical
Yeah.
effects. So like The Last Starfighter, which of course I mentioned last week, was heavy on CGI. We didn't really get a lot of CGI special effects again until Terminator 2 came out. But it's an amazing story.
It was the
Sorry, go ahead.
liquid. It was the liquid metal that they where
Yes,
they really
yeah.
did a lot of the CGI, which
All
is
those,
just an
yeah.
amazing effect.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, you know, you watch it now and it's like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. That doesn't seem that revolutionary, but in 1991, it was amazing, and that's all ILM. I think there was another studio that was doing that, but ILM had their fingerprints all over that. But it was such a good story. It was a really solid story. It was a very tight story, and it was a cool twist to have Arnold come back as the good guy, because for anyone who doesn't remember, Arnold was the bad guy in the first Terminator movie, and he comes back and they don't reveal it right away. They do sort of a, you know, in maybe 20 or 25 minutes into the movie, they reveal that he's the good guy, but he comes back and everybody thinks he's the bad guy. So it's really interesting. This was in my own little personal trivia bucket. This was the first movie that my dad ever took me to see that was rated R in the theaters, because my parents were always really strict on rated R movies, but they sort of let me have a little bit more leeway when it came to movies that were just rated R based on like violence and language and things like that. But you can they released many versions of this movie since 1991 that include additional footage. I think the most recent versions include an extra 15 minutes of footage, which is really interesting. It's intercut within the movie, so you can watch it. It's not just deleted scenes that are tacked on as special features. They put them back in the movie, which I always think is sort of an interesting, you know, sort of view into the way that Cameron wanted to make it. But ultimately, I think it's good that they left him out, with the exception of there's one scene with Michael Biehn. You know, he comes back as Kyle Reese in sort of a dream sequence, which is really cool.
That's cool. Yeah.
So yeah, Terminator 2. I mean, I can't think of a single bad thing to say about that movie. It is flawless from top to bottom, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, if we were doing a podcast of greatest sequels, yeah, that's certainly on my list, probably at the top of my list. And I might have to flip a coin between that and Empire.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. Great. It's actually not on my list. If I were doing an honorable mention, and I've got a list of like 20 honorable mentions, that would be my number one honorable mention, though. That's at the top of that list. My number one is actually a film we already talked about. It is, again, John McTiernan again. It is the 1988 Die Hard. This movie to me is, again, it's it is action from the word go all the way through. I have not shown it to my boys yet, but they're to the age that they can watch it. They have seen The Matrix, and they were blown away by The Matrix, and I cannot wait to have them see Die Hard. You know, I guess, again, I'm not going to rehash everything we talked about. Bruce Willis, Alan Rickman, Bonnie Bedelia, you know, a $35 million budget, made $150 million, spawned 3 sequels, 4 sequels, 5?
4. 5 movies, 4 sequels, yeah.
Yeah. The last couple are not very good, in my opinion. The first 3 are really, really worth watching and are really solid films. The second film, Die Hard 2, which I think that script was actually supposed to be another film, wasn't it? It was
Die Hard 2. Know that.
I thought Die Hard 2 was supposed to be like.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up, but that was filmed at Dulles Airport in Washington D.C., where my wife and I spent a lot of time. And then the third one is Sam Jackson and Jeremy Irons. But this first movie is, you know, this is really the first, in my mind, everyman film, right? It's not Stallone, it's not Schwarzenegger, it's just kind of a regular guy who, as he walks across glass, gets cut, right? I mean, he's not wearing shoes. He cuts his feet. It's Carl, it's Urkel's dad, right? Is down, you know, right? I mean, it's just an every guy film, right? And to your point, it's got one of the greatest villains in the history of movies, Hans Gruber. I mean, God, he's so good. The one thing that is kind of a running joke at this time, whether or not Die Hard is a Christmas movie. I tend to think I'm in the camp of I think it is a Christmas movie. But part of that is just me kind of being a troll and whatever. The bottom line is it's a great fucking action movie. Whether it's a Christmas movie or a summer movie, it doesn't matter. It's an awesome movie. Well worth checking out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so good. And even though Hans Gruber is not a really well thought out character, I think the fact that we all know him by name, like,
Right.
I mean, think of all the 80s action movies, right? And think of all the bad guys in those movies. Like, do you remember any of their names? Like, no, it doesn't matter. Yeah, Alan Rickman played that so well and did such an amazing job with it that everybody remembers that. And it's not because they flushed out his character. It's because he brought everything that there was to bring to that.
Booby, I'm your white knight.
So quotable, so many movies, or so many good quotes from that movie, I should say. It's fantastic.
All right. So now we're not doing honorable mentions tonight. We're gonna do rapid fire. Do you want me to go or do you want to go first?
I'm gonna start. I'm gonna let you finish. I'm gonna start with this, and we already did one, and I already know what your answer is gonna be to another because you already tipped your hat just a second ago. But more iconic tagline: "I'll be back" or "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker."
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker. All
right. Better badass: Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor or Sigourney Weaver as Ripley.
Oh wow. I have to go with Linda Hamilton just based on T2. Ripley is an amazing, probably has a better body of work overall, but as a single film, I'll go with Linda Hamilton.
Okay, all right. This one may be the quintessential question: Arnold or Sly?
Arnold.
I agree. And this is the one you've already tipped your hat to. Die Hard, ho 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 or ho ho no as a Christmas movie?
Ho ho ho.
Yeah. I go ho ho no. I'm vehemently in the other camp. I'm very much, this is not a Christmas movie, but also this is still a great movie, obviously. And then the last one is sort of it's an interesting sort of continuation of this story. The Expendables, is it worth the wait or why bother?
You're gonna bust my balls. I've never seen the Expendables all the way through.
I'm not gonna bust your balls. I've only seen the first one. There's 3 of them, and I think they personally, I think they waited too long to do that kind of movie. But I mean, they literally got every single action star you could possibly think of from the 80s.
And, so I guess by default I'd have to see the latter, right? Just because it just wasn't on my radar. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that they waited that long to get Stallone, and unless I'm missing something obvious, but that's the first time I think Stallone and Schwarzenegger ended up in the same movie.
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of like Heat with Pacino and De Niro.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, for us in 80s action movies, I mean, it was either Stallone or Schwarzenegger, or in most cases, it was just, you're enjoying both of them, but there was sort of a rivalry, an understood rivalry between them, which, should have been settled long before they finally made that movie. But those are my rapid fires.
All right. So here's 5 rapid fires for you, sir. Number 1, Schwarzenegger or Stallone?
Schwarzenegger. Yeah.
Schwarzenegger. Okay. Number 2, war movies, sci-fi or westerns?
Sci-fi, hardcore for me. Yeah.
Okay. Number 3, jump off a building or blow up a building?
I'd probably rather blow it up from far away. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Number 4, go on a quest for an item or save the girl?
Oh, I mean, I'm saving the girl every time.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And number 5, secret agent, super spy or everyman?
Oh, geez. That's a good one. I think
James Bond or James McClane or John McClane, right?
I think James Bond makes a better movie. I think I relate better with John McClane, but ultimately I'm more interested in fantasizing about being the super spy, so those movies are probably more interesting to
Okay.
me.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool. I do find it interesting that more for me probably than you that I didn't put a James Bond movie on here just because I
I thought
love
about
those.
that. That
Yeah.
was one of my predictions, and I'm really surprised that that didn't end up
Yeah.
there.
If I would have put one on here, it would have been probably either Thunderball or Goldeneye, believe it or
Okay.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, but uh, hey, there's just the other thing I was kind of surprised about, like, there was neither of us had a Schwarzenegger movie or a Stallone movie, right? So there's no Rambo, no Commando, no
Holy
True
shit.
Lies, none of
Yeah.
that.
Well, I had Terminator.
Okay, Terminator.
Yeah.
You're right. Sorry.
But aside from that, yeah, like it was RoboCop, Matrix, Kill Bill, and Die
Yeah.
Hard. So
Right.
they weren't sort of the standard traditional action. But one of the ones that I did want to mention, and I'll just throw this out as my unofficial honorable mention, The Last Action Hero is an interesting movie, not because it's a good action movie, but because it's very meta as it relates to
Sure.
action movies.
Yeah.
Before meta was a term that anybody knew or used. I thought that was really interesting because it was very satirical and it was sort of slapsticky in the way that they made fun of action movies, which was a bold thing to do for someone like Schwarzenegger. I didn't like it at the time, but I think I appreciate it a lot more now for what it does and some of the tropes that it teases. So yeah, that was
Yeah.
another one I kind of wanted to
Yeah,
toss
and
out
I
there.
guess the other thing that kind of surprised me is Chuck Norris didn't show up on our list anywhere.
You know,
You know,
it doesn't surprise me personally because
yeah,
I'm trying to think like I know Chuck Norris,
right.
obviously everybody does, but I can't think of a lot of movies that I've seen him in,
Yeah,
like,
he's a
and all the
guy.
way through,
Yeah, he's Delta Force and Missing in Action and like
Yeah.
those kind of. But I guess to your point, those are not great movies, right? They're
Well, they may be, but I've never seen him, to be honest.
yeah,
He was
okay,
sort of like the B grade action star back
yeah,
in the 80s. Like
yeah.
he wasn't Schwarzenegger, he wasn't
You know what he is?
Stallone.
You'll get this reference. He's the Shannon Tweed of action movies, right? What I mean, like
Yeah.
he's yeah,
Yeah, he's Jeff Speakman, he's Michael
yeah.
Dudikoff, he's like all these action stars that, legitimately had some good flicks, but nobody saw them because
Dudikoff is a good call.
there was just too many really good. I mean, Schwarzenegger and Stallone dominated the action market in the
Yeah.
80s. I mean, that's it. I mean, if you weren't one of the two of them, then your movie probably wasn't getting seen a whole
And
lot.
you know what? We didn't mention Van Damme once, which is a little bit surprising too. We didn't even mention it.
Yeah, I mean, I I don't regret that.
No.
If I'm looking back at it, like
Yeah.
Bloodsport was good, but
Yeah.
none of his other movies, in my opinion, I don't know. Time Cop was really good, but I think I felt self-conscious about putting another sci-fi movie in my
No,
list.
that's good. Yeah. I enjoyed Kickboxer. And what was the one?
Double
He,
Impact was
no,
one.
there was one that he played one that he played a cop with what's the chick from Weird Science? Uh, oh
Kelly
shit.
LeBrock?
Yeah.
Or are you
Oh
thinking Mia Sarah from Ferris Bueller?
no. Yeah. No, I'm
That
thinking
was
Kelly
Time
LeBrock.
Cop.
No, Kelly LeBrock for sure. It was I can't remember what it was, but
I think you're thinking of Steven Seagal, which is another one we didn't mention because he was in
you're
Hard to
right.
Kill
I
with
was.
her.
I'm sorry. I
I
was
think he
thinking
was
of Seagal.
actually married to her at one point,
Yes,
right?
I was thinking of Seagal. You're right.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
another one that didn't end up on our list, but I mean, as movies go, like the martial arts were good, but the movies weren't as
Not great.
memorable. Yeah.
Not great.
Fair.
Well, hey, and I guess the good news out of all that is we just came up with 3 or 4 more podcast topics that we can talk about in the future.
At least.
So, all right. Well, hey, this has been amazing as always. My name is Chewie, and I've been joined by my brother Pip, and this has been our all-time favorite action movies. Thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure as always.
As always. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. All right. Later.